The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as Admiral Chun Wei stood on the bridge of the U.S. Retribution, watching the tactical display with cold calculation. 3 months had passed since the Zephyrian invasion began. 3 months of watching helplessly as reports flooded in from the outer colonies. Families torn apart, cities reduced to ash, entire worlds stripped bare of life. The enemy had shown no mercy, no hesitation in their systematic destruction of everything humanity held dear. Admiral, we're receiving another distress signal from Kepler 442b, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. The colonists are requesting immediate evacuation. They estimate they have maybe 6 hours before the Zephyrian fleet reaches their position. Chen's jaw tightened. 6 hours. It would take the nearest rescue fleet at least 2 days to reach them, assuming they could spare the ships. The mathematics of war were brutal and unforgiving, and, right now, the numbers were not in humanity's favor. The Zephyrian Confederacy had emerged from the galactic core 3 years ago, a species driven by an insatiable hunger for organic matter and an absolute disdain for what they considered inferior life forms. They were technologically superior in many ways. Their energy weapons could slice through human shields like paper. Their ships moved with an elegance that defied conventional physics, and their tactical coordination was flawless. They had conquered 17 species before setting their multifaceted eyes on human space. Sir, we could attempt a fast burn to Kepler 442b, suggested Commander Jackson Torres, the Retribution's tactical officer. If we push the engines past Redline and jettison non-essential cargo, we might make it in time to extract at least some of the civilians. Chun shook his head slowly. And sacrifice this entire fleet for a few thousand colonists? I understand the sentiment, Commander, but we have to think bigger. We have to think about the war, not just the battle. The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of the ship's systems. Chun could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a physical force. Every choice in this war came with a price measured in human lives, and he was tired of always being the one to calculate the cost. Admiral, came a new voice from the communication station. Ensign Rebecca Hayes looked up from her console with wide eyes. We're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. It's marked with the highest encryption level. Chun felt something shift in his chest. The highest encryption level was reserved for only the most critical information, the kind that could change the course of the entire war. He had been waiting for this message for weeks, hoping against hope that the rumors filtering down through command were true. Transfer it to my ready room. Commander Torres, you have the bridge. Chen's ready room was a spartanly furnished space reflecting the pragmatic nature of military life during wartime. A single desk, a few chairs, and a wall-mounted display showing the current tactical situation across human space. Red dots marked Zephyrian positions, blue dots showed human fleet locations, and yellow indicated contested systems. There was far too much red on the map. The message began with the familiar face of Admiral Patricia Valdez, Supreme Commander of Earth's combined fleet. Her expression was grim, but determined, and Chun could see something in her eyes that he hadn't seen in months. Hope. Admiral Chun, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Project Prometheus has been completed ahead of schedule. The new fleet is ready for deployment, and you've been selected to lead the vanguard. Chen's breath caught in his throat. Project Prometheus had been a whisper, a rumor, a desperate hope that Earth's best scientists and engineers could develop something to turn the tide. The project had been so secret that even most fleet commanders didn't know the details. The Prometheus fleet incorporates technologies we've reverse-engineered from captured Zephyrian vessels, combined with some rather creative human innovations. I won't go into the technical details over this channel, but I will say this, we found their weakness, Chun. Every species has one, and the Zephyrians are no exception. Valdez leaned forward, her expression intensifying. You are to proceed immediately to the Sigma Draconis system. Intelligence indicates that the Zephyrians are massing their entire battle fleet there for a final push toward Earth. They believe they can end this war in one decisive engagement. They're right about one thing: this will be decisive. The transmission continued with coordinates and tactical data, but Chen's mind was already racing ahead to the implications. A final battle. Everything humanity had worked for, everything they'd sacrificed, would come down to a single engagement in the cold void between the stars. When the message ended, Chen sat in silence for several minutes, absorbing the magnitude of what lay ahead. Then, he activated the ship's intercom system. "This is Admiral Chen speaking to all hands. I'm not going to lie to you. We're heading into the biggest fight of our lives. For 3 months, we've been on the defensive, watching our colonies burn, counting our losses. Today, that changes. Today, we take the fight to them." He paused, thinking about the young faces he saw every day on the bridge, the crew members who had volunteered to stand between humanity and extinction. "I know many of you have lost friends, family members, entire worlds to the Zephyrian advance. I know some of you are scared, and that's okay. Being scared means you understand what's at stake. But I also know that every single person on this ship signed up to defend humanity, and today we get the chance to do exactly that." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Throughout the ship, crew members dropped their work to cheer, to applaud, to release 3 months of pent-up frustration and grief in a single moment of defiant hope. Chan could hear it echoing through the corridors, a sound that spoke to something fundamental about the human spirit. Within the hour, the Retribution and her escort fleet had changed course for the rendezvous point. As they jumped to faster-than-light travel, Chun found himself thinking about the journey that had brought humanity to this point. They were a young species by galactic standards, having achieved interstellar travel only 2 centuries ago. They were still learning, still exploring, still making mistakes that more experienced civilizations had learned to avoid millennia ago. But they were also adaptable in ways that other species found difficult to understand. Where the Zephyrians relied on overwhelming technological superiority and rigid tactical doctrine, humans improvised. Where other species might have surrendered after the first devastating defeats, humans got angry. And when humans got angry, they got creative. The rendezvous point was a seemingly empty patch of space on the edge of the Sigma Draconis system, far from any inhabited worlds or major shipping lanes. But as the Retribution dropped out of hyperspace, Chen realized that empty was the last word anyone would use to describe this location. The Prometheus fleet was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Ships unlike anything in the human arsenal hung in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with an almost organic sheen that seemed to shift and flow in the starlight. They were clearly human in design philosophy, functional, aggressive, built for war, but incorporated technologies that made them look almost alien. "My God," whispered Commander Torres from beside Chun. "How many ships are there?" Chun was counting as well, his tactical mind automatically cataloging the different classes and configurations. Battleships that dwarfed anything in the current fleet, destroyers with weapon configurations he didn't recognize, and something at the center of the formation that could only be described as a dreadnought, a ship so large it had its own gravitational field. 237 ships, reported the sensors officer. "And, Admiral, I'm reading power signatures unlike anything in our database. Whatever drives these ships are using, they're operating on principles I can't even begin to understand." A communication request appeared on Chen's personal display, and he accepted it immediately. The face that appeared was familiar. Admiral Marcus Wright, one of Earth's most decorated naval commanders, and Chen's former instructor at the Naval Academy. "Chen, good to see you made it. I'd love to catch up on old times, but we have work to do. Transfer your flag to the Prometheus and prepare for the most comprehensive tactical briefing of your career. What you're about to learn will change everything you thought you knew about space warfare." The transfer to the Prometheus took place via a small shuttlecraft, giving Chun his first close-up look at the new ships. The hull plating seemed to ripple and shift as he watched, and he realized with a start that it was actually alive, some kind of biomechanical hybrid that could adapt to different types of damage in real time. The Prometheus herself was even more impressive from the inside. The corridors were wider than on traditional human ships, with an organic flow that seemed designed to channel energy rather than simply contain it. The bridge was a masterpiece of integrated technology, with displays and control surfaces that responded to the crew's thoughts as much as their physical inputs. "Welcome aboard the future of human naval power," Wright said as he led Chun to the tactical center. "What you're looking at is the result of 18 months of intensive research into Zephyrian technology, combined with some rather unconventional thinking about the nature of space combat." The briefing that followed was unlike anything Chun had ever experienced. The Prometheus fleet incorporated captured Zephyrian biotechnology, but not in the way he had expected. Rather than simply copying their enemies' weapons and defenses, human engineers had found ways to turn those technologies against their creators. The key insight came from studying Zephyrian communication systems, Wright explained, gesturing to a complex three-dimensional display showing the internal structure of a Zephyrian ship. They don't use traditional electronics. Everything in their vessels is connected through a kind of biological neural network. It makes them incredibly efficient, but it also creates a single point of failure. Chun studied the display with growing excitement. "You found a way to hack into their systems. Better than that, we found a way to make their own ships turn against them. Every Prometheus vessel is equipped with what we're calling a neural disruptor, a weapon that can inject false commands directly into a Zephyrian ship's control network. We can make their weapons fire on their own allies, shut down their engines, even trigger their self-destruct sequences." The implications were staggering. For months, the Zephyrian advantage had seemed insurmountable. Their superior technology and tactics had allowed them to win engagement after engagement with minimal losses. But if the Prometheus fleet could turn their greatest strength into a weakness. "There's more," Wright continued. "Intelligence indicates that the Zephyrians are planning to mass their entire fleet in this system for a final push toward Earth. They believe they can end the war with one decisive victory. They're bringing everything they have, over 3,000 ships, including their command dreadnoughts." Chun felt his blood run cold. 3,000 ships was more than twice the size of Earth's entire combined fleet. Even with the advantages of the Prometheus technology, those were overwhelming odds. "I know what you're thinking," Wright said with a grim smile. "But remember, we're not planning to fight them ship to ship. We're planning to make them fight themselves. The bigger their fleet, the more chaos we can create when we turn their own weapons against them." The next few hours were spent in intensive tactical planning. The Prometheus fleet would approach the Zephyrian staging area under cloak, another reverse-engineered technology that made human ships nearly invisible to enemy sensors. They would wait for the enemy fleet to fully assemble, then strike with coordinated neural disruptor attacks designed to create maximum confusion and friendly fire incidents. It was a plan that relied heavily on timing, coordination, and more than a little bit of luck. But as Chun studied the tactical projections, he began to believe it might actually work. The Zephyrians had grown overconfident, accustomed to their technological superiority. They weren't expecting humanity to adapt so quickly or so effectively. "Admiral," came a voice from the communication station. "We're receiving reports from our scout ships. The Zephyrian fleet is beginning to assemble in the target system. They're moving faster than projected. It looks like they want to begin their final offensive within the next 72 hours. Chun nodded grimly. 72 hours to prepare for the most important battle in human history. Around him, the bridge of the Prometheus hummed with activity as officers and crew members made final preparations for the engagement ahead. The stakes couldn't be higher. The survival of humanity itself hung in the balance. But for the first time in months, Chun felt something he had almost forgotten: confidence. The Zephyrians had taught humanity a harsh lesson about the realities of galactic warfare. Now it was time for humanity to teach them a lesson of their own about the dangers of underestimating a species that refused to give up. The war was about to enter its final phase, and Admiral Chun Wei intended to make sure that when the dust settled, it would be human ships that controlled the starways, not Zephyrian ones. The time for defense was over. The time for victory had begun. The tactical display in the Prometheus Command Center showed a sight that would have terrified any human commander 6 months ago. 3,000 Zephyrian vessels hung in perfect formation around the gas giant Sigma Draconis III, their biomechanical hulls gleaming with an oily iridescence that spoke of technology beyond human understanding. Dreadnoughts the size of small cities formed the core of the formation, surrounded by layers of cruisers, destroyers, and fighter craft that moved with the coordinated precision of a living organism. Admiral Chun Wei studied the enemy formation with a cold, analytical mind that had earned him his reputation as one of humanity's finest tactical commanders. The Zephyrians had arranged themselves in a classic siege formation, optimized for the systematic destruction of planetary defenses and the complete annihilation of any opposing fleet. It was a formation that had served them well in 17 previous campaigns against other species. Neural mapping is complete, Admiral, reported Commander Lisa Park, the Prometheus fleet's chief technology officer. Her voice carried a mixture of excitement and nervousness that Chun understood completely. They were about to field test weapons and tactics that existed more in theory than in proven practice. We've identified the command pathways for the entire enemy fleet. The neural disruptors are locked and loaded. Chun nodded, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. The past 72 hours had been a masterclass in preparation and coordination. Every ship in the Prometheus fleet had been equipped with the new neural disruptor technology, and every crew had been drilled extensively in the new tactics they would need to employ. But there was a vast difference between training simulations and actual combat, especially against an enemy that had never experienced defeat. Status report from all fleet divisions. Chun ordered. Alpha Division ready for deployment. Came the response from Admiral Rodriguez aboard the Dreadnought Defiance. All neural disruptors are charged, and targeting systems are locked onto their assigned targets. Beta Division standing by, reported Admiral Kim from the heavy cruiser Indomitable. Cloak systems are functioning normally, and we remain undetected by enemy sensors. Gamma Division ready to engage, confirmed Admiral Singh aboard the carrier Valkyrie. Fighter squadrons are prepared for immediate launch upon your order. Chun felt a surge of pride listening to his subordinates. These were some of humanity's finest officers, commanders who had proven themselves in the desperate defensive battles of the past months. Each of them understood the stakes, and each of them was prepared to do whatever was necessary to ensure victory. Admiral, came a new voice from the intelligence station. We're detecting massive energy buildups throughout the Zephyrian fleet. It appears they're beginning final preparations for their assault on the inner systems. This was it, the moment that would determine whether humanity survived as a free species or joined the 17 others that had fallen to Zephyrian conquest. Chun activated the fleet-wide communication system, knowing that his next words would be heard by over 200,000 men and women who had volunteered to stand between Earth and extinction. This is Admiral Chun to all Prometheus fleet vessels. We stand at the threshold of the most important engagement in human history. For months, we have watched our colonies burn. We have mourned our dead, counted our losses, and wondered if we had the strength to continue fighting. Today, we answer that question. He paused, thinking about the faces he had seen on refugee ships, the desperate messages from dying worlds, the countless small acts of heroism that had kept humanity's spirit alive during the darkest days of the war. The enemy believes they have already won. They believe that their technological superiority makes them invincible. They believe that humanity is just another species to be conquered and consumed. Today, we show them how wrong they are. Today, we show them that humanity doesn't surrender. We adapt, we overcome, and we never, ever give up. The response from the fleet was immediate and overwhelming. Across 200 ships, voices raised in defiant cheers, in battle cries, in a simple human affirmation that they would not go quietly into extinction. Chun could feel the energy through the communication channels, the raw determination of a species that had been pushed to the brink and had chosen to push back. All ships initiate final approach, maintain cloak integrity, and prepare for synchronized assault. The operation begins in 60 seconds. The Prometheus fleet moved like ghosts through the void, their advanced cloaking systems rendering them invisible to Zephyrian sensors. Chun watched the distance counter tick down as they closed with the enemy formation, his heart beating with the steady rhythm of a countdown to destiny. The Zephyrian fleet was even more impressive up close. The biomechanical ships pulsed with internal light, their hulls rippling with what appeared to be muscle tissue beneath chitinous armor plating. It was technology that humanity was only beginning to understand, but understanding was not necessary for victory. Exploitation was. 30 seconds to optimal firing position, reported the tactical officer. Chun could see individual Zephyrian vessels now on the main display, their alien architecture both beautiful and terrifying. Each ship was a work of art, a fusion of biology and technology that represented millions of years of evolutionary development. But evolution, Chun reflected, was about adaptation to changing environments. And the environment was about to change dramatically. 10 seconds to firing position. All ships report ready. Chun took a deep breath, thinking about all the factors that had led to this moment. The desperate retreat from the outer colonies. The sleepless nights spent planning impossible defenses. The gradual realization that conventional tactics would never be enough to defeat an enemy with such overwhelming technological advantages. And finally, the breakthrough that had made this moment possible. The discovery that the Zephyrians' greatest strength could be turned into their greatest weakness. Fire. The neural disruptors activated simultaneously across the entire Prometheus fleet, invisible beams of energy that carried specially designed signals directly into the biological neural networks that controlled every Zephyrian vessel. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The enemy formation remained intact, their ships continuing their systematic preparations for the assault on human space. Then chaos erupted. The first sign of a neural disruption was a Zephyrian heavy cruiser that suddenly opened fire on its own escort vessels. Its weapons, designed to punch through the heaviest human armor, tore through the lighter Zephyrian ships like paper. Within seconds, a chain reaction began as confused and disoriented vessels throughout the formation began firing on targets that their compromised neural networks identified as enemies. Neural disruption successful across 60% of enemy fleet, reported Commander Park, her voice tight with excitement. Enemy command and control systems are showing massive system failures. Chun watched with grim satisfaction as the perfectly ordered Zephyrian formation dissolved into pandemonium. Ships that had been maintaining precise formation spacing were now colliding with each other as their navigation systems fed them false information. Others were spinning wildly out of control as their attitude thrusters fired randomly. Still others were venting atmosphere and energy as their own weapons tore them apart from the inside. But the Zephyrians were not helpless. Even as nearly 2/3 of their fleet succumbed to neural disruption, the remaining vessels began implementing emergency protocols. Command ships that had been protected by additional shielding started broadcasting override signals, attempting to regain control of their compromised vessels. Admiral, we're detecting organized resistance from the enemy command dreadnoughts, reported the intelligence officer. They're adapting faster than projected. Some of their ships are beginning to regain control. Chun had expected this. The Zephyrians had not conquered 17 species by being slow to adapt. Their command officers were among the finest military minds in the galaxy, and they would not remain passive while their fleet tore itself apart. All ships implement Phase 2, decloak, and engage with conventional weapons. Target priority is enemy command vessels and any ships showing signs of recovery from neural disruption. The Prometheus fleet shimmered into visibility like deadly mirages materializing from a void. Their appearance in the heart of the enemy formation caused a new wave of chaos as Zephyrian ships that had been struggling to regain control suddenly found themselves under attack from an enemy they hadn't even known was present. The engagement that followed was unlike anything in the history of space warfare. Human ships, their hulls incorporating captured Zephyrian biotechnology, dueled with enemy vessels that were firing as often on their own allies as on their attackers. The neural disruptors continued their work, sending false commands through the Zephyrian fleet network and creating waves of confusion that rippled through their formation like a virus. Direct hit on Zephyrian Command Dreadnought Omega-7, reported the tactical officer. Enemy vessel is listing heavily and showing multiple hull breaches. Chen allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, but he knew the battle was far from over. The Zephyrians were beginning to adapt to the neural disruption, implementing manual overrides and establishing hardened communication channels that were more difficult to compromise. Worse, the sheer size of their fleet meant that even with their severe losses, they still outnumbered the human force by nearly 2-1. Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Wright aboard the Defiance, reported the communications officer. Wright's face appeared on Chen's personal display, his expression grim but determined. Behind him, Chen could see the bridge of the Defiance, its displays showing damage reports and tactical data from throughout the engagement. Chen, the neural disruption is beginning to lose effectiveness. The enemy is adapting faster than we anticipated, and they're starting to coordinate effective countermeasures. We need to move to the final phase of the operation. Chen nodded. The final phase was something they had all hoped to avoid, a direct conventional engagement between the remaining human and Zephyrian forces. It would be a battle of attrition, and despite their technological advantages, the Prometheus fleet was still heavily outnumbered. Understood, Marcus. All fleet commanders implement Phase 3. Conventional engagement protocols are now in effect. Target the enemy command vessels and maintain maximum pressure on their formation. The battle intensified as the neural disruption effects began to fade, and the surviving Zephyrian vessels regained full control of their systems. But the damage had been done. Nearly a third of their fleet had been destroyed or crippled by friendly fire, and their formation had been completely disrupted. More importantly, their confidence had been shattered. For the first time in their military history, the Zephyrians had been outmaneuvered and outfought by what they considered an inferior species. Enemy formation is beginning to reform around their surviving command vessels, reported the tactical officer. They're implementing a defensive posture, but their coordination is still severely compromised. Chen studied the tactical display with growing optimism. The Zephyrian fleet, once a perfectly coordinated instrument of destruction, was now a collection of individual units struggling to re-establish effective communication and command relationships. They were still dangerous. Their individual ships remained technologically superior to most human vessels, but they had lost the overwhelming advantage that had made them seem invincible. Admiral, came an urgent voice from the sensor station. We're detecting massive energy buildups from the enemy command dreadnoughts. It appears they're preparing to implement some kind of area effect weapon system. Chun felt his blood run cold. Intelligence reports had suggested that the Zephyrians possessed weapons capable of sterilizing entire star systems, but they had never been observed in actual use. If the enemy commanders were desperate enough to deploy such weapons, they might be planning to destroy both fleets rather than accept defeat. All ships, emergency scatter pattern, maximum dispersion immediately. But even as he gave the order, Chen knew it might be too late. The Zephyrian dreadnoughts were already building to critical energy levels, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with an intensity that suggested weapons of unimaginable destructive power. In seconds, they would unleash devastation that could end the battle, the war, and possibly all life in the system. It was at that moment that humanity's greatest strength revealed itself once again. Not superior technology or overwhelming force, but the simple refusal to accept the unacceptable. Throughout the Prometheus fleet, individual commanders made split-second decisions that would have been impossible to coordinate or plan. Ships that should have scattered instead turned directly toward the enemy dreadnoughts, their crews understanding intuitively what needed to be done. This is Captain Morrison aboard the destroyer Relentless. We're beginning attack run on enemy command vessel. All power to forward weapons and shields. Captain Zhang aboard the cruiser Intrepid. We're joining the attack. For Earth and humanity. This is the crew of the Valiant. We're going in. Make them count. Chun watched with a mixture of pride and horror as dozens of his ships abandoned all pretense of self-preservation and threw themselves directly at the charging enemy dreadnoughts. It was a desperate gambit, but it was also quintessentially human, the willingness to sacrifice everything for the chance to protect others. The impact of the coordinated attack was devastating. Human ships, their hulls enhanced with captured Zephyrian technology, struck the enemy dreadnoughts just as their weapon systems reached critical charge. The resulting explosions lit up space for millions of kilometers, creating new stars that burned briefly and brilliantly before fading into the void. When the glare faded and the tactical systems recalibrated, Chen found himself looking at a completely transformed battlefield. The Zephyrian command structure had been decapitated, their remaining ships scattered and leaderless. The threat of system-sterilizing weapons had been eliminated, but at a terrible cost in human lives. Status report from all remaining vessels. Chun ordered, his voice heavy with the weight of command decisions that had sent good people to their deaths. The responses came slowly, each one a reminder of the price of victory. Nearly a third of the Prometheus fleet had been destroyed or severely damaged in the final assault, but they had accomplished their objective. The Zephyrian war machine, seemingly invincible just hours before, was now broken and demoralized. Admiral, came a weak transmission from one of the surviving Zephyrian vessels. This is Fleet Commander Zethkaler. We request terms for surrender. Chin stared at the communication for a long moment, hardly believing what he was hearing. In all their previous conquests, the Zephyrians had never offered surrender. They had fought to the death rather than accept defeat, destroying entire worlds rather than allow them to fall into enemy hands. Terms accepted, Chen replied finally. Prepare to receive boarding parties and surrender all vessels under your command. This war is over. As the remaining Zephyrian ships began powering down their weapons and dropping their shields, Chan allowed himself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. Humanity had won, not through superior numbers or overwhelming firepower, but through adaptability, creativity, and the simple refusal to give up in the face of impossible odds. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. There would be prisoners to process, technologies to study, and alliances to forge with the 17 species that had been liberated from Zephyrian control. Most importantly, there would be a future to build, a future where humanity had earned its place among the stars not as conquerors, but as protectors of those who could not protect themselves. Admiral Chan Wei looked out at the stars and smiled for the first time in months. The human fleet had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. The processing of surrender was unlike anything Admiral Chun Wei had ever experienced in his military career. Across the scattered remnants of what had once been the most feared fleet in the galaxy, Zephyrian vessels were powering down their weapons and opening their airlocks to receive human boarding parties. The sight of the insectoid aliens meekly submitting to their former prey would have been unthinkable just days before. Admiral, we've completed initial boarding of 47 Zephyrian vessels, reported Commander Torres from his position aboard the heavy cruiser Indomitable. The alien crews are offering no resistance. In fact, sir, they seem almost relieved. Chen frowned at this unexpected development. Intelligence reports had suggested that Zephyrians were incapable of surrender, that their species' psychology made them fight to the death rather than accept defeat. Yet here they were, not only surrendering, but apparently grateful for the opportunity to do so. Elaborate on that, Commander. What do you mean by relieved? Sir, I'm observing their body language and comparing it to the xenopsychology profiles we've developed. The Zephyrian prisoners are exhibiting what our analysts interpret as expressions of liberation, as if a great weight has been lifted from them. This was unexpected and potentially significant. Chun made a mental note to have the xenopsychology teams conduct detailed interviews with the prisoners as soon as possible. Understanding the enemy mindset had become even more important now that they were no longer enemies. Continue standard processing procedures, but I want detailed psychological evaluations of all senior Zephyrian officers. There may be information here that could change our understanding of this entire conflict. The bridge of the Prometheus hummed with activity as reports continued to flow in from throughout the former battlefield. Damage assessment teams were cataloging the wreckage of destroyed ships, both human and alien. Medical teams were treating the wounded from both sides. And intelligence specialists were beginning the massive task of studying captured Zephyrian technology and data systems. Admiral, came a voice from the communication station. We're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. Admiral Valdez wants to speak with you immediately. Chun accepted the transmission, and moments later found himself looking at the tired but triumphant face of Patricia Valdez. Behind her, he could see the bustling activity of Earth's primary command center, where officers and analysts were undoubtedly struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what had just occurred. Chun, I don't have adequate words to express what you and your fleet have accomplished today. When we planned this operation, our most optimistic projections gave us a 30% chance of tactical success. What you achieved goes far beyond anything we dare to hope for. Chun felt a mixture of pride and exhaustion. The victory had come at a terrible cost. Over 60 ships destroyed, thousands of crew members dead or wounded. But the alternative would have been the complete destruction of human civilization. So the mathematics of war, brutal as they were, clearly favored the outcome they had achieved. Thank you, Admiral. But I have to ask, what do we do now? We've won the battle, but we're sitting in the middle of alien space with a fleet that's been badly mauled. And we have nearly 5,000 Zephyrian prisoners to deal with. Valdez nodded grimly. That's why I'm contacting you directly. The situation is more complex than we initially understood. In the past 12 hours, we've been receiving surrender offers from Zephyrian commanders throughout the galaxy. Not just military units, entire planetary governments, civilian populations, even their colonial administration structure. It appears that news of their defeat has triggered a complete collapse of their political and military hierarchy. This was staggering news. The Zephyrian Confederacy had been a cohesive interstellar empire spanning hundreds of worlds and encompassing multiple star systems. The idea that a single military defeat could cause such a complete systematic collapse suggested internal weaknesses that human intelligence had never detected. Sir, are we talking about a full-scale surrender of their entire civilization? That's what it looks like. But, Chun, that creates as many problems as it solves. We're talking about responsibility for hundreds of worlds, billions of alien civilians, and technologies that we barely understand. Earth Command is scrambling to develop protocols for managing what appears to be the largest governmental collapse in galactic history. Chun felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. Military victory was one thing. He understood the tactics and strategies needed to defeat enemy forces. But managing the surrender of an entire interstellar civilization was far beyond anything his training had prepared him for. What are my immediate orders, Admiral? Establish secure communication with all Zephyrian military commanders in your area of operations. Begin preliminary negotiations for the transfer of territorial control and the establishment of interim governmental structures. And, Chun, be very careful. We're walking into uncharted territory here, and the decisions we make in the next few days could determine the future of this entire region of space. The transmission ended, leaving Chun staring at a tactical display that now showed something unprecedented in human history. An interstellar empire in complete collapse, with Earth's forces as the only remaining organized military power in the region. Admiral, came a hesitant voice from the intelligence station. We've completed preliminary analysis of the Zephyrian command databases that we captured. Sir, I think you need to see this immediately. Chun made his way to the intelligence center, where a team of analysts was working frantically to decode and translate captured alien data systems. The xenolinguistics officer, Commander Sarah Kim, looked up from her workstation with an expression of bewilderment and concern. Sir, what we've discovered challenges everything we thought we knew about the Zephyrian Confederacy. According to their internal records, their entire military expansion over the past decade wasn't voluntary conquest. It was flight. Flight from what? Kim activated a three-dimensional display showing the galactic core region where the Zephyrians had originated. According to these records, there's something in the deep galactic core that the Zephyrians were desperately trying to escape. They call it the Consumer of Worlds, and their records suggest it's responsible for the destruction of dozens of advanced civilizations. Chun studied the display with growing alarm. The galactic core was largely unexplored by human vessels. The intense radiation and gravitational anomalies made it extremely dangerous for conventional spacecraft. If something in that region was powerful enough to frighten a species as advanced as the Zephyrians into abandoning their home territory. Commander, are you telling me that the Zephyrians weren't conquerors? They were refugees. That's exactly what I'm saying, sir. Their military doctrine, their ruthless expansion tactics, their complete disregard for other species, all of it appears to have been driven by desperation. They believed that only by establishing complete control over this region of space could they build defenses strong enough to stop whatever is following them from the galactic core. The implications were staggering. If the Zephyrians had been fleeing from something even more dangerous, then humanity's victory over them might have eliminated the only force capable of defending this region of space against a much greater threat. Sir, Kim continued, there's more? According to these records, the Consumer of Worlds operates on a predictable cycle. It systematically destroys all advanced civilizations in a region of space, then moves on to the next region. Based on their calculations, it should reach the edge of our local galactic arm within the next 5 years. Chun felt his blood run cold. 5 years to prepare for a threat that had driven the technologically superior Zephyrians to desperate measures. 5 years to understand alien technologies, reorganize conquered territories, and somehow build defenses against an enemy that existed more in legend than in verified intelligence reports. I want this information transmitted to Earth Command immediately. Priority Alpha encryption. And I want every piece of data about this Consumer of Worlds translated and analyzed as quickly as possible. The next several hours passed in a blur of activity. Chun found himself juggling multiple crises simultaneously, processing the surrender of Zephyrian military units, beginning negotiations with alien civilian governments, and trying to understand the magnitude of the threat that was apparently approaching from the galactic core. The first direct contact with a senior Zephyrian official came when Fleet Commander Zethkaler was brought aboard the Prometheus for formal surrender negotiations. The alien was impressive even in defeat, nearly 3 meters tall, with compound eyes that seemed to take in everything simultaneously, and mandibles that clicked with what the xenopsychology team interpreted as expressions of respectful acknowledgement. Admiral Chun, Zethkaler said through the translation device that allowed cross-species communication, I must express my admiration for your tactical innovations. In 300 years of military service, I have never encountered a species capable of such rapid technological adaptation. Chun studied the alien commander, looking for signs of deception or hidden aggression. But the Zephyrian's posture and vocal patterns suggested genuine respect. even a kind of relief that Chun found difficult to understand. Fleet Commander, I've been reviewing your internal records. According to your own data, your expansion into this region wasn't driven by conquest, but by the need to flee from something in the galactic core. Is that accurate? Zethkaler's compound eyes seemed to dim, and his mandibles clicked in what the translation system interpreted as profound sadness. Admiral, my species has not been truthful about the nature of our expansion. We are not conquerors by choice, but refugees driven by necessity. For the past 50 years, we have been fleeing from something that your language cannot adequately describe, a force that consumes entire star systems and leaves nothing but emptiness in its wake. Tell me about this consumer of worlds. The Zephyrian commander was silent for a long moment, his massive form seeming to shrink as he contemplated the question. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of fear that transcended species boundaries. Imagine, Admiral, an entity that exists partially outside normal space-time. It feeds on organized matter and energy, growing stronger with each civilization it consumes. It moves through space like a wave of annihilation, destroying everything in its path with weapons that manipulate the fundamental forces of physics themselves. Chun felt a chill run down his spine. And this entity is heading in our direction? According to our calculations, it will reach the outer edge of this galactic arm within 5 of your Earth years. My species believe that only by controlling every resource in this region could we hope to build defenses adequate to stop it. That is why we were so ruthless in our expansion. Not from cruelty, but from desperation. This changed everything. The war that had just ended wasn't simply a victory for humanity over alien invaders. It was potentially a catastrophic setback in the defense of the entire galaxy against an even greater threat. Chin realized that he was facing decisions that would affect not just human civilization, but potentially all life in their region of space. Fleet Commander, would your people be willing to share their knowledge about this consumer of worlds? To work with humanity and the other liberated species to prepare a defense? Zethkaler's mandibles clicked rapidly, which the translation system interpreted as surprise and hope. Admiral, my people would consider it the greatest honor to join such an alliance. We have failed in our attempt to prepare adequate defenses, but perhaps together our combined knowledge and resources might be sufficient. Chun felt the weight of command settling even more heavily on his shoulders. In the space of a few hours, he had gone from planning the defeat of an alien invasion fleet to organizing the defense of an entire galactic region against a threat that might be beyond comprehension. But as he looked around the bridge of the Prometheus, seeing the faces of officers and crew who had already proven they could achieve the impossible, he felt a familiar surge of determination. Very well, Fleet Commander. Consider this the beginning of a new alliance. We have 5 years to prepare, and we're going to need every advantage we can get. As the formal surrender negotiations continued, Chin found himself thinking about the incredible journey that had brought humanity to this point. 6 months ago, they had been a relatively minor species, barely beginning to explore their local region of space. Now they found themselves thrust into the role of galactic protectors, responsible for organizing the defense of hundreds of worlds against an enemy that existed almost beyond comprehension. Admiral, came a voice from the communication station. We're receiving signals from throughout Zephyrian space. It appears that news of our alliance with Fleet Commander Zethkaler is spreading rapidly. Planetary governors, military commanders, even civilian populations are requesting permission to join the defensive preparations. Chin nodded, feeling both overwhelmed and oddly optimistic. The task ahead was enormous, but humanity had already proven that it could adapt to seemingly impossible circumstances. And now they wouldn't be facing the challenge alone. They would have allies, technologies, and resources that had been developed over centuries of interstellar civilization. Open channels to Earth Command, all allied species, and the Zephyrian leadership. It's time to begin planning for the real war. the one that will determine the survival of our entire galactic region. As the Prometheus and her surviving fleet began the long journey back toward human space, Chun found himself looking forward with a mixture of apprehension and anticipation. The easy victory was over. Now came the hard work of building something unprecedented in galactic history. A true interstellar alliance capable of standing against forces that transcended normal understanding. The human fleet had arrived and changed the course of galactic history. Now it was time to see if they could do it again when the stakes were even higher and the enemy was beyond anything they had ever imagined. 5 years had passed since the battle at Sigma Draconis, and the galaxy had transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. Admiral Chun Wei stood on the observation deck of the massive orbital station that now served as the headquarters for the Galactic Defense Alliance, watching construction crews put the finishing touches on humanity's contribution to the greatest military project in galactic history. The Aegis defense grid stretched across 17 star systems, incorporating technologies from 8 different species and representing the combined industrial output of hundreds of worlds. Massive energy collectors harvested power from entire stars, while automated manufacturing facilities produced weapons and defensive systems on a scale that dwarfed anything previously imagined. It was a testament to what could be accomplished when diverse civilizations work together toward a common goal. Admiral, we're receiving the final status reports from all sector commanders, reported Captain Elena Rodriguez, who had been promoted to serve as Chen's chief of staff after the reorganization of the human fleet. All defensive positions are fully operational. The grid is ready for activation. Chen nodded, though his expression remained troubled. Despite 5 years of intensive preparation, despite the unprecedented cooperation between former enemies, despite technological advances that had revolutionized their understanding of physics itself, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were still fundamentally unprepared for what was coming. What's the latest intelligence on the consumer's approach? Long-range sensors confirm that it will reach the outer edge of the Kepler 440 system within the next 36 hours. Admiral, the energy readings are extraordinary. Our best scientists estimate that it's generating power equivalent to the total output of at least 50 G-class stars. 50 stars. Chen tried to wrap his mind around such a scale of power, and failed completely. The human imagination, even enhanced by 5 years of exposure to alien technologies and concepts, simply wasn't equipped to grasp the magnitude of the threat they were facing. The past 5 years have been a whirlwind of discovery, construction, and alliance building that had tested humanity's adaptability in ways that the war with the Zephyrians never had. Within months of the surrender, Earth's xenoarchaeology teams had uncovered evidence that the consumer of worlds had been active for millions of years, systematically destroying advanced civilizations across the galaxy in a pattern too regular to be natural. The Zephyrian archives had provided crucial intelligence, but they had also revealed the horrifying scale of the threat. The consumer wasn't simply a powerful alien species or an advanced artificial intelligence. It was something that operated on principles beyond current scientific understanding, manipulating space-time itself as a weapon and showing capabilities that suggested technology millions of years in advance of anything possessed by the current galactic civilizations. Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from Fleet Admiral Zethkaler aboard the Integrated Command Vessel Unity, reported the communications officer. Chun accepted the transmission, and the familiar form of the former Zephyrian commander materialized on the holographic display. Over the past 5 years, Zethkaler had become not just an ally, but a trusted friend, his strategic insight and deep knowledge of the consumer's capabilities proving invaluable in planning the defense. Admiral Chun, all Zephyrian defensive positions report ready for engagement. I must say, the integration of human tactical flexibility with our technological base has exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Chun smiled grimly. The alliance between humanity and the former Zephyrian Confederacy had been one of the most remarkable developments in the post-war period. What had begun as a simple military necessity had evolved into a genuine partnership, with human creativity and Zephyrian technological sophistication complementing each other in ways that neither species had anticipated. Any last-minute intelligence updates on the consumer's capabilities? Zethkaler's mandibles clicked in what Chun had learned to recognize as deep concern. Our deepest archive databases have yielded additional information about its tactical patterns. The consumer appears to begin each engagement by attempting to establish what we can only describe as dimensional anchors, points in space-time that allow it to manipulate local physics. If it succeeds in establishing these anchors, conventional weapons become essentially useless. This was new information, and Chun felt his stomach tighten with apprehension. Why wasn't this included in previous briefings? Because, my friend, we were not certain that the records were accurate. The descriptions of dimensional manipulation seemed too fantastic to be credible. However, our joint research teams have now confirmed that such technology is theoretically possible, though far beyond our current capabilities. Chun absorbed this information with a stoic acceptance that had served him well throughout his career. New intelligence, no matter how disturbing, was always better than operating in ignorance. It simply meant that their defensive plans would need to be even more flexible than previously anticipated. All sector commanders, this is Admiral Chun with updated tactical intelligence. The enemy may attempt to establish dimensional anchors that could neutralize conventional weapons. All units are to maintain maximum mobility and be prepared for immediate relocation if local physics begin showing anomalous readings. The next several hours passed in a tense mixture of final preparations and growing anticipation. Throughout the Aegis defense grid, millions of beings from dozens of different species worked together to prepare for an engagement that would determine the fate of their entire galactic region. Human engineers worked alongside Zephyrian biotechnicians, while species that had been mortal enemies just years before coordinated their defensive strategies with a precision that spoke to the transformative power of shared necessity. Admiral, we're detecting massive space-time distortions at the edge of the Kepler 440 system, reported the sensor officer, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and professional excitement. The consumer of worlds has arrived. Chun moved to the main tactical display, where a three-dimensional representation of local space showed something that defied easy description. It wasn't a ship in any conventional sense. It was more like a convergence of force fields and energy patterns that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. As he watched, whole asteroid fields simply ceased to exist as the entity passed through them, their matter and energy apparently absorbed into whatever served as the consumer's physical form. Scale? Chun asked, though he dreaded the answer. Approximately 15,000 kilometers in diameter, sir. But the readings are inconsistent. Sometimes it appears larger, sometimes smaller. I don't think conventional measurements apply to whatever we're dealing with. 15,000 kilometers. The scale was beyond anything they had prepared for. Their largest weapons platforms were designed to engage targets measured in hundreds of meters, not thousands of kilometers. It was like trying to fight a mountain with a rifle. All stations implement Defensive Protocol Omega, begin charging the primary grid systems, and prepare for engagement at maximum range. Throughout the Alliance fleet, crews scrambled to implement the most sophisticated defensive strategy ever conceived. The Aegis defense grid wasn't designed to destroy the consumer. Early analysis had suggested that conventional destruction might be impossible. Instead, it was designed to contain it, to create barriers and interference patterns that would prevent it from establishing the dimensional anchors that seemed to be crucial to its tactical approach. Sir, the consumer is beginning to emit coherent energy patterns. Our physics teams believe it's attempting to establish dimensional interface points throughout the system. This was the moment they had trained for over the past 5 years. Chun activated the Alliance-wide command frequency, knowing that his next words would be heard by every ship and station in the defensive grid. This is Admiral Chun to all Alliance forces. The consumer of worlds has begun its assault on our defensive perimeter. You all know what's at stake here. Not just our own civilizations, but potentially all life in this galactic region. We've spent 5 years preparing for this moment, building defenses that surpass anything previously imagined, forging alliances that transcend the boundaries of species and politics. He paused, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. From a desperate defensive war against Zephyrian invaders to a galaxy-spanning alliance against a threat beyond normal comprehension. It had been a transformation that demonstrated the remarkable adaptability of all the species involved. The enemy we face today is unlike anything our predecessors ever encountered. But we have advantages that no previous civilization possessed. We have the combined knowledge and resources of dozens of species. We have technologies that blend the best innovations of multiple galactic civilizations. And most importantly, we have the determination to stand together against extinction. The response from the fleet was immediate and overwhelming. Across thousands of ships and installations, voices raised in defiant acknowledgement of the challenge ahead. It was a sound that transcended species boundaries, the unified voice of intelligence refusing to submit to annihilation. All units, engage the consumer. Show it what happens when a galaxy stands united. The Aegis defense grid activated with a brilliance that briefly outshone the local star. Weapons that manipulated fundamental forces unleashed energies measured in stellar outputs, while defensive systems created barriers that existed partially outside normal space-time. The consumer responded by accelerating its dimensional manipulation, attempting to establish anchor points that would allow it to neutralize the Alliance's technological advantages. The battle that followed was unlike anything in the recorded history of warfare. Conventional concepts like range, speed, and trajectory became largely meaningless as both sides employed technologies that bent the basic rules of physics. The consumer's attacks existed simultaneously across multiple dimensional levels, while the Alliance's defenses created interference patterns that prevented the entity from establishing stable anchor points in local spacetime. Dimensional barriers holding at 73% efficiency, reported the tactical officer. The consumer is attempting to establish Type 7 anchor points, but our interference generators are preventing stable formation. Chen watched the tactical display with growing optimism. The defensive strategy was working better than their most optimistic projections had suggested. The consumer was clearly powerful beyond normal comprehension, but it seemed to rely heavily on its ability to manipulate local physics. As long as the Alliance could prevent it from establishing dimensional anchors, they could force it to operate within parameters that made conventional resistance possible. "Sir, we're detecting something unexpected," reported the intelligence officer. "The consumer appears to be communicating. We're receiving structured signals on multiple frequency ranges." This was completely unexpected. Intelligence analyses had suggested that the consumer was more like a force of nature than an intelligent entity, destroying civilizations through instinct rather than conscious choice. The possibility that it might be capable of communication opened up tactical options that no one had previously considered. Route the signals through the xenolinguistics department. If this thing is trying to communicate, I want to know what it's saying. The response came within minutes, and it changed everything. The xenolinguistics team had managed to establish a basic translation matrix, and the consumer's message was both simple and terrifying in its implications. "Admiral, the entity is broadcasting a single repeated message. Compliance will result in efficient processing. Resistance will result in prolonged processing. Outcome remains constant." Chun felt a chill run down his spine. The consumer wasn't just a force of nature. It was intelligence, but one so alien and so powerful that it viewed the destruction of entire civilizations as a simple administrative process. It was offering them a choice, but only in the method of their destruction, not in the ultimate outcome. "Send a response," Chen ordered. "Tell it that we choose neither compliance nor resistance. Tell it we choose survival." The Alliance fleet continued its coordinated defense, maintaining the dimensional barriers that prevented the consumer from establishing full control over local physics. But Chen could see from the tactical displays that their defensive systems were beginning to show strain. The consumer was adapting to their interference patterns, finding new ways to manipulate space-time despite the barriers they had established. Sir, dimensional barriers are down to 58% efficiency. The consumer is beginning to establish partial anchor points in sectors 7 and 12. This was a crisis point they had all feared. If the consumer succeeded in establishing even partial dimensional control, it would be able to neutralize their technological advantages and begin the systematic destruction of the Alliance fleet. Chun made the decision that would define the outcome of the engagement. All units implement Contingency Protocol Alpha. Begin immediate withdrawal to secondary defensive positions. But even as he gave the order, Chun realized that something unprecedented was happening. The consumer, instead of pursuing the retreating Alliance forces, had begun to slow its advance. Its dimensional manipulation attempts were becoming less frequent, less aggressive. It was almost as if the entity was reconsidering. Admiral, we're receiving another transmission from the consumer. This one is different. The new message, when it came through the translation matrix, was unlike anything they had expected from an entity dedicated to the systematic destruction of galactic civilizations. Unexpected resistance patterns detected. Survival probability calculations require revision. Alternative processing methods under consideration. Chen stared at the translated message, hardly believing what he was reading. The consumer of worlds, the entity that had destroyed countless civilizations across millions of years, was apparently capable of changing its mind when faced with unexpectedly effective resistance. Open a communication channel, Chen ordered. I want to talk to this thing directly. The conversation that followed would be remembered as one of the most important diplomatic exchanges in galactic history. Over the course of several hours, Chen and the consumer engaged in a dialogue that revealed the entity's true nature. Not a mindless force of destruction, but an intelligence so advanced and so alien that it viewed the pruning of galactic civilizations as a form of cosmic gardening, necessary to prevent the universe from becoming overcrowded with competing intelligences. You demonstrate unexpected adaptive capabilities, the consumer acknowledged through the translation matrix. Previous civilizations in this galactic region showed limited flexibility in response to processing initiatives. Your alliance represents a novel, evolutionary development. We're not just another civilization to be processed, Chen replied firmly. We're a community of species that has chosen cooperation over competition, growth over conquest. We represent something new in galactic evolution. The consumer was silent for a long time, its massive form continuing to manipulate dimensional fields, but no longer in an obviously aggressive pattern. When it finally responded, its message contained implications that would reshape the future of galactic civilization. Proposal: suspension of processing operations in this galactic region, pending extended observation of Alliance development patterns. Condition: demonstration of continued cooperative evolution and expansion of Alliance principles to additional species. Chun felt his heart racing as he realized what the consumer was offering. Not victory in the conventional sense, but something far more significant, recognition as a legitimate evolutionary development worthy of continued existence. It was a reprieve that came with conditions, but it offered hope for a future that extended beyond simple survival. Proposal accepted, Chen replied without hesitation. The Galactic Defense Alliance commits to continued expansion and development of cooperative principles throughout this region of space. The consumer's response was immediate. Processing operations suspended. Monitoring protocols activated. Evolutionary Development Assessment Cycle, 1,000 standard galactic years. As the massive entity began to withdraw toward the galactic core, its dimensional manipulations fading until it existed more as an absence than a presence. Chen found himself looking around the bridge of the command station with a mixture of exhaustion and wonder. They had faced annihilation and not only survived, but had somehow convinced their would-be destroyer that they represented something worth preserving. "Admiral," came a voice from the communications station. "We're receiving congratulations and celebration signals from across the entire alliance. Every species, every world, every ship in the fleet is celebrating our survival." Chin nodded, but his expression remained thoughtful. They had won a reprieve, not a final victory. The consumer would return in 1,000 years to evaluate their progress, and if humanity and its allies had not continued to evolve, to grow, to demonstrate the cooperative principles that had impressed their cosmic judge, then the processing would resume. "Send a message to all Alliance members," Chun ordered. "The immediate threat has passed, but our real work is just beginning. We have 1,000 years to prove that we deserve to exist, and we're going to make every one of those years count." As the Aegis defense grid began the process of standing down from battle stations, Chen found himself thinking about the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. Humanity had emerged from a desperate defensive war against alien invaders to become the focal point of the most successful interstellar alliance in galactic history. They had faced extinction twice and survived both times through adaptability, determination, and the simple refusal to give up. The human fleet had arrived 5 years ago and changed the course of a single war. Today, they had helped change the course of galactic evolution itself. It was a responsibility that would define their species for the next millennium, but it was also an opportunity to demonstrate that intelligence, cooperation, and hope could triumph over even the most overwhelming odds. The stars were calling, and humanity was ready to answer.